A very warm welcome to one and all. The man before us needs no introduction. Termed as a Jack Warner of India by Newsweek and rated one of the 75 most influential people of 21st century, Ronnie Screwvala has been an iconic figure in the networking media industry. He has been a pioneer in the Indian entertainment business who built the UTV media empire from scratch and has been at the helm of the transformation of this sector for the past 3 decades. Onto his second innings now, Ronnie is driven by his interest in championing entrepreneurship in India, focused through his venture fund Unilaser Ventures, to build next set of ground-up businesses in high growth and impact sectors. Hence the topic of the talk today, a step ahead along the curve in disruptive innovation. He's also passionate about social welfare and has been active along with his wife as founder trustees of Swadesh Foundation, which operates with single-minded focus of empowering 1 million lives in rural India to help lift them out of poverty permanently. Sir, we are delighted to have you here. Can we have a round of applause for Mr. Ronnie Screwvala, please?
Good evening. I think you'll have a pretty interesting day from whatever I heard briefly. So let me try and see whether I can match up to what a good day you're already having. I think the topic is broad enough, and I think today what I want to cover, primarily with a fair amount of my own personal experience, is because the topic is about innovation and disruption, and where I think, especially from an industry that I've been in and been part of for almost 20 years, what one has been able to contribute and do in that. And then I kind of want to just talk about 5 or 6 or 7 broad things and just some thoughts that I have outside of innovation and disruption, which I think could possibly be thought-provoking to some of you all and could lead to a lot of question and answers. And this is, I think, as compact an environment as there can be to really spend a fair amount of time, at least half our time, on Q&As, because I think that's when we really get to understand what the initial aspects are. I think the topic I was given was disruptive innovation and how to make commercial sense of it. Now, the word disruptive for a lot of people starts off with the premise that you actually need to constantly be disruptive. And I think being disruptive for the sake of being disruptive makes no sense at all. I think the question today more than ever is it relevant is because the normal phrase that people hear, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, I think is gone. I think that phrase doesn't exist anymore, because if you start not fixing what doesn't need to get fixed, chances are you could be an anachronism or you could have actually been outdated very, very soon. And there are Fortune 500 companies that stand example of that, Kodak and many others to be on one side, and multiple areas. So I think that phrase goes away. So when that sense of constant is to be questioned on an ongoing basis, without necessarily making change for the sake of change and disruption for the sake of disruption, I think each one today in your career crossroad, tomorrow in your job crossroad or in your entrepreneurial crossroad, you have to necessarily work out what element of disruptiveness you're going to do. As you stand today, and your first over the next 2-3 year goals, I think are much more about what are my options in my career and what does disruption mean to me? I'm still getting organized. I'm still reflecting. I'm still looking at every of my options. How disruptive can I get? And I think even today, the constant of what it was to come in from campus recruitment, get a professional job and go forward, I think it's an extremely competitive environment outside. So I don't think you can take what you could take for granted 10 years back anymore either. So the element of competitiveness, the element of disruption is very important. Innovation somehow has this very highfalutin, grandeur word, which I think needs to get simplified. Because for most people, it just sounds like, that's not for me, or this is something that's going to be extremely challenging for me to do. And you need to simplify that, because innovation from many aspects is not, you don't need to be a Graham Bell every time, and you don't need to have discovered, you don't need to be a Steve Jobs to only be innovative. I think each one of us, it's not necessarily that you need to discover something. It's also innovation when you look at solving a problem in a very different way, offering a service in a very different way, figuring out how you're going to get through a particular interview in a different way. So I think if you start simplifying and not putting such a high level of expectation on the word innovation, you'll actually make your reflection much more presentable, much more simple in that context. If I was to take a couple of examples for me in terms of innovation, right in the early days, some of the things when you're pioneering and you're looking at innovation comes out to be that when I started off with cable television in this country. Now, for most people here, you're not going to be able to visualize it, but that was an era and a time when you had a single channel, a TV set that did not have a remote control, and one single channel out there. So if you take that as a mindset, and if I told you that you're going to have multiple choices, it's a massive concept sell. It's innovation, it's pioneering, and it can easily be before its time. And to our extent, for almost 2 years, one would have thought that if you were in an environment where all you had is a choice of one single channel and somebody gave you a choice of multiple viewing, everyone would say, pretty simple, let's go for it. Not so, because it took us 2 years of consistent concept selling to actually present this innovation in a very different manner. And therefore, it requires that element of persistence, whichever way you look at that. So in many aspects, innovation critically is also about a lot of persistence. You've got to be able to simplify it, but it's very accessible to everybody because it is not something that necessarily results back into just creating something out of nothing. So innovation is really taking a key challenge, and I think at that stage for us, when it came to, for example, cable TV, to much later when we started looking at elements in broadcasting, for example, when we wanted to look at entering the broadcasting era, and we zeroed in on a kids channel, for us the disruption and innovation was that there were 5 channels run by global majors, Disney, Time Warner, Viacom, having Nickelodeon, etc. And we wanted to launch the 6th kids channel in the country, especially when the 5 were not really clearly defined and nobody was looking at them. And if you look at that, there was nothing that everyone looked at because everyone looked to us and said, this is not necessarily going to work. To us, therefore, we needed to be innovative and we needed to be disruptive. We looked at the opportunity and said, do we believe here that we understand the Indian consumer from the 4 to 14 age group better than some of the multinationals? And our answer was yes. Did we believe that the asset that the multinationals had of their 10,000 hours of their own library, an advantage to them or a possible risk constraint and a burden? And we said we'll make it a constraint for them and we'll keep ourselves as being the nimble footed person who can necessarily go out there and look at the world as our oyster and not that we have a preordained approach. And therefore we went out and looked at everything outside of what the offerings of these were to look at what was going to be disruptive. So just to give it to you as a simple example, if you break it down, it's not as intimidating as it sounds when you're looking at what do I need to be disruptive, where do I need to be disruptive, what is the core sector product offering necessarily that one would need to do. So that's just one element, and I'd be happy to look at that more with some sense of question and answers. And the last one, when I'm looking at being disruptive and innovative, again, in media for us, when we were looking at scaling up, was when we started to look at diversifying and starting a movie studio. Now, for a lot of people, you know, it's a 101-year-old industry now, and when we entered into the motion picture business as part of UTV, this was only about 9 or 10 years back. It was already a 90-year-old industry. So if you look at that and you feel, how am I going to enter this industry? What's my differentiator? In a business where there's a lot of work that happens quite incestuously and everyone has got strong relationships, how am I going to break that apart? And then you introspect and figure out, again, how am I going to be innovative about that thought process? And I think we picked 3 areas. One, we wanted to look at a core audience that was 15 to 25 in the tight segment and 15 to 35 in the broad segment. We wanted to work with completely new talent because we didn't have a competitive edge to go back to the superstars at that stage and make what we wanted to do. And we wanted to focus on the narrative, the ability to tell strong stories. We created those 3 differentiators because we were extremely hungry that the entire model of what we wanted to do would not go to the next level and we would not get scale and UTV could not become a brand unless we could scale it up to the next level, where without being part of the big screen image and media, we couldn't really succeed. So those to us were the disruptive moments for what we wanted to necessarily do. So I think in each one you need to introspect specifically which one are yours and which ones specifically don't work for you all. Couple of themes I just want to talk about. One is pioneering. For a lot of people, again, like innovation, that's intimidating. And yes, there is a sort of what I would call a fine line between being before your time and being pioneering. And I think for a lot of people, when they're looking at that element, you need to understand that if you're before your time, A, how are you going to know it? B, how are you going to change the model of what you're doing there? And then C, from that point, are you going to step out and say, well, I might as well walk away and come back when it's the good time for it or not? And the chances are that if you've got the first mover advantage, and even if you're 1 to 2 to 3 years before your time, can you recalibrate? Can you take your cost model down? Can you actually, is there an advantage of staying there for those 2 or 3 years because you'll still be the first person, the first mover, or should you be moving out? And that's an important judgment call to make. May not be a very reflective area here right now, but I think in the sectors that you'll go into, whether you start a business of your own or whether you get into a job, I think this is going to be an important element of figuring out that when I want to be extremely innovative or if I want to pioneer, have I got my sense of timing right? Because if it's slightly before its time, you need to be able to recalibrate and go forward. Domain expertise is something that's very important, and I think when you're looking at university and college and then going into the element of thought process, many of you all, as you go forward into your careers, will feel from time to time that you're the outsider in that conference room, outsider in that discussion room, outsider in some element or the other. And I think that's something, again, you need to prepare yourself for. Are you the outsider in the room in that sector? Chances are you may be. And how are you going to reflect and align yourself for being the outsider in the room? Because at that stage and point in time, it's something that you may not have full domain knowledge for. You'll have to do an excess amount of homework to be able to do that. But it's fine to be the outsider in the room because that puts a lot more pressure on you to be able to look at things in a very, very fresh and different way. When I look at the practical world, and I would say that for us in media, attracting talent from outside was very, very critical and important. And therefore, being able to judge people, look at where they come from, where their graduation skills are extremely important. And I think I've personally been at the crossroad where management studies are not management studies. What are the pros and cons of that? When I go out, do I want to pursue a professional career or do I want to be an entrepreneur? What's the right timing in all of those aspects? And in a question answer, I'm sort of happy to discuss that. But I think a couple of takeaways, especially when you're at the cusp of what you are in management school, from the practical world outside and reflecting on that, because one has interacted, dealt with, worked with closely people who have been at that level, grown over 10 years, is really the fact that there's a tremendous amount of learning and a tremendous amount of competitive spirit that is already taught here. The key part here is how are you going to translate your learnings into the real world? I'm not sure whether that is fully taught. And that is something that you need to constantly introspect, because otherwise what you're going to get into is you're going to look at this world and then you're going to look at the sandbox that you're in. And every time something challenges you as you go forward in your career, you'll want to go back to the sandbox and you'll want to go back to that box and keep thinking, but I've learned this is what I was told. In this case, my options are A, B, and C. Let me see if A, B, and C is relevant. So all I would caution you is, as you're figuring out your next levels of your career, you need to figure out how am I going to translate what I'm going to do here. And I know that's difficult because you're already spending an 18-hour day figuring out how you're going to go through your workshops, or your interactive classes, and your studies. But really the true test is, how is this going to get translated in the outside world? Because if you don't, then you could find yourself either great for a large corporation, but as the world gets more and more competitive, you could feel the outsider in the room. But I think if you can figure out how you're going to necessarily translate that and hold on to your studies and not look at that as a comfort zone for coming back into. And that's something that's been my personal experience where I've interacted with people who come from management school, whether they're 2 years out of it or even 10 years later in the real world. And that's been something to me that has been something that has been a very active counseling session that says, Now, wait a minute, don't go back to a theoretical aspect. Now, apply that and translate that into what you want to do. And I think that is something that if you can invigorate yourself from, it's going to make a tremendous amount of difference. Overall, I don't know how many of you all here have an ambition to be an entrepreneur. Can I just have a rough show of hands? Really? Okay. That's about a little more. Can I just have a show of hands again? That's a little bit more than 25%, 30%, maybe 35%. Okay, I don't know whether that's good or bad, and I'm not here to tell you whether that's good or bad. But I think the environment in India still is extremely challenging for entrepreneurship, and I think that needs to change. I think that everyone here necessarily feels that sense of peer pressure, social pressure, and of course, family and parental pressure that makes you feel that it's a bad reflection on you that you first haven't landed yourself a fantastic job, and that actually entrepreneurship came about not because it's equally aspirational as a great job, this is what it should be, but that it's almost like a fallback because you didn't get one. And I think that's an ecosystem and environment that can be solved with two ways. One is an acute amount of communication with the family and family members, because that's going to be important, but more so, it's your own self-confidence. And I think if anything else, if you're clear about the goal of whichever way you want to pursue it, and even if the timing is not today and it's tomorrow, the key aspect here is confidence. Because most people in India, failure is not revered. People only want to hear about success stories. They don't necessarily want to hear about the necessary failures that went with it, or sometimes even the failure stories. Anywhere else in the world, and if you keep benchmarking saying, but this happens in the US, actually failure is revered there. You'll find more people getting funded who really big time failed. Because frankly, that is a phenomenal asset. It's an asset in your balance sheet that learning is there, and you've been resilient, and you've come back for more. And I think if you start building that level of confidence in yourself from now, and that, as I term it, failure is a comma and not a full stop, because when you fail, that's not the end. It's at that moment in time, there's a stop, then you're going to recalibrate, and you have to move forward. You don't have a choice as far as that is concerned. So I think this entire ecosystem and level of confidence and our fear for failure has to move away. Because if you do that, your chances of necessarily succeeding are 10x of what they would be if you walked in there without necessarily that clear sense of confidence and a clear sense that actually the failure is not anything more than a setback. Which is why for me, in most times, and I think now in this avatar, when I'm looking at people or looking at when we're investing into companies or finding people in entrepreneurship or even leadership, it's not just in entrepreneurship. A CEO of a company or somebody who's a potential CEO 5 years later of a company necessarily needs to be. I think the question for me is, and I know in management school we always learn more about making plan Bs. Now making a plan B on a situation is quite different from having a plan B in life. And I think I'm not a good and strong believer of plan Bs personally, because of the simple reason that of course at the time at which you are evaluating different options, which are not at the precipice of a clear-cut decision of your life, or which is of a crisis, it's perfectly fine to have a plan B, because it's not a theoretical situation, but you're evaluating all options and you're putting it in the back of your left brain in case that were to go about. But in real life, if you continue to have a plan B, you're depleting your own resources. You're already lowering your conviction of your plan A. And I know that's a difficult one and a difficult concept sometimes to understand. But if you think about it and you reflect on it, specifically if you want to choose a career option, whether it is to be a research and development or whether you want to join NASA or now ISRO more than NASA, or necessarily from that point of view you want to be an entrepreneur, don't make a plan B. You cannot go and say, well, let me try this for 2 years and see how it goes, because if it doesn't, I can always come back here. And guess what? Even IIM Bangalore is telling me after 2 years, if you don't succeed in entrepreneurship, you can come back into the faculty program that will offer you a job. Because the minute you do that, you're already starting to walk with a parachute. And that's not a way you're going to go about it. Because if that's what it is, chances are you will be constantly looking with your left eye for the exit door. Because you're not going to get all the support you want on day one. Because real success in entrepreneurship or R&D or in your professional career or leadership to be a CEO of a corporation, small, big, or whatever else, is going to come with being and staying with plan A and with your conviction on that. Because that's the only way you're going to go forward. Because timing is not in your hand. You may take 2 years, you may take 3 years. It's in the 4th year that you're going to succeed, and you just gave yourself 2 years. And then you felt you failed. Whereas actually that was not the criterion. You were never ordained to fail in the first place. It just worked out and happened that way. So I would leave that one last thought, that when you're looking at any of your options from here, try and be as clear and convinced as you can be. This should not be mixed up with everyone is absolutely clear when they graduate from management school about exactly what careers they want to option. So you could be phenomenally confused. Even at 40 people are confused, even at 50 people are confused. So there's no guilt pangs about being confused. But that's quite different from necessarily not having the conviction that I'm not going to have an option and a plan B for me to go forward and take it. So I think these are some of the broad thoughts I wanted to start off with, and I want to throw this house open for Q&A if I can. Yeah?
So I just want to know that should innovation be a part of curriculum? And if yes, what should be taught as a part of innovations?
Yeah, so I think I kind of touched on that, but let me give you my personal view for it. If you put it as a line item and if you put it as something that is outside of what you anyway need to do and look at innovation as a new additional task, I think you're in trouble in the first place, because it has to be part of your DNA. This is the 21st century, and you're not joining a company or starting your own enterprise or starting at the bottom of the ladder expecting somebody else to innovate, that this is somebody else's job. And I wish somebody would have taught me in business school to innovate. I think it is something that is part of the DNA of what you're necessarily doing, which is why I said how you're approaching a subject, how you're necessarily figuring out all of that. I think it has got to be built into that. And innovation is not an end. You can look at it sometimes as a means to an end. If you look at it as an end, it just sounds like, wow, look what I innovated, look what I found, look what I discovered, look what I patented, look what I had IP. If you take that mindset out and look at it as an ongoing process, you'll demystify innovation and it'll stand in good stead for you for the long term.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead. Firstly, there's no such thing as a good entrepreneur and a bad entrepreneur. So take that out of your mind. There isn't one, because that's something that will evolve over a certain period of time. But in the initial stages, I think it is conviction and confidence. Conviction and confidence. Somebody's looking for not just the idea. That idea will be there. Chances are it's not going to be so breakout and so jaw-breaking in today's age that it'll stand out and say, wow. Because at least 20 other people in some other room would have thought about it. So it's really the conviction and the confidence of your ability to take that forward. And second is your passion as an entrepreneur. How convinced you are about that. A little bit of this whole plan B element. Is this person really going to stay the course? Is he looking at this as a plan option? You know, what if I tell him, no, you're not going to get any funding, but instead of the 50 lakhs that you wanted or the 5 crores you wanted, can you do this in 25 lakhs? And if you come back and say, no, I don't think I can do it in 25 lakhs. Chances are then that could be a cross, because you can cut your coat and cloth, because all the person is asking you is show me some proof of concept. So I think that complete passion that says I'm going to get it done regardless, even if you don't do it, I'm going to be able to do it, is some of the criterions that I think in today are going to be quite relevant. Yeah.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
I have a doubt. I have started my own startup. So I have a doubt regarding. I have this confusion in mind. So my capabilities right now are quite limited. So how much do I target? Sometimes I think that having a bigger goal and then trying to build capabilities is better. And sometimes I also think probably trying to do something with my current capabilities is better. So how do you reach a balance between these two?
So firstly, I'll start by stop using the word doubt and confused. Let's try and drop that, because the more you do that, the more your left brain is going to start getting used to that. So I think you should genuinely stop thinking about what, those are absolutely valid questions to be asked, but not in a manner in which it's confusing. Because if it's confused, chances are we kind of revel in that and then we stay confused. But if you say this is an question and I need to answer it in that thought process, you'll work better for you, just from a mindset point of view. Coming specifically, I think, to your answer, it's also a little bit about the team. Are you planning to do this on your own? Because if you have something that's so different and unique, chances are you're going to have to attract a sense of team members who buy in on that concept. That's going to be the first formative part of giving you some clarity of the road ahead in that. Then you've got to go with your conviction. And if you don't have any conviction, you'll have to build some empirical part of it. Other than that, I can't give you any specifics, except that treat it in a time-bound manner, ask the specific questions and not in the generic way in which you're asking it right now would be my first answer. Put a timeline to that thought process. See whether you can have a buy-in from external people, whether it could be an element of a mentor, or team members are willing to join you were you to find the right backing. It'll give you a good sense of confidence, because actually right now, from what I can see, you need a bout of confidence to say, let me go for it. Do you think I've answered your question? Yeah. There are two mics now, that's the problem.
Good evening,
But,
sir.
sorry, he
Okay.
spoke first. But I'll come back to you in a second.
So you said that the environment in India.
Can you just hold it closer?
Right.
Yeah.
So you said that the environment in India is resistive to entrepreneurship, right? So how do you then, as an individual, back yourself to take the risk to drop out of institutions like IIMs and pursue your entrepreneurship dreams?
Well, why do you want to drop out of IIM?
So because I meant to say that if you have a dream and you know that it might just work out, how do you back yourself?
Yeah, but just
without-
because Bill Gates and Steve Jobs did that doesn't mean you necessarily need to drop out of it. But to answer your question, I'm not sure what it is. I don't think it's the question of dropping out. The question is, so how do I go forward in this headwind territory of not? So make your question a little bit more specific for me. Where are you finding the headwind?
to it, right? Be to it. And a
You
lot
should
of us,
not have plan B.
Right.
If you want to be an entrepreneur or you want to be a CEO of a company, go for it straight.
Yeah, but a lot of us in India are, let's say, given to pressure by our parents or peer pressure as to be secure with our academic degrees first and then go ahead and do what we want. So my question was based on that how do we move out of this insecurity of having a backup plan and then go and take all out risks to become entrepreneurs?
Well, firstly, if you're sitting in this auditorium, means you've already taken that decision. I would say finish that decision and go through that process. You don't need to do anything radical by walking out of this door right now and starting to build your entrepreneurial dream. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. Take this time now, whether you're at the end of your first year or you're in the middle of your second year, to start evolving and start maturing the thought process and start putting a notebook on it and use that time because it's giving you that much more clarity of thought. Now, when it comes to the environment, I can only tell you one thing. In the real world, this is going to be a problem that you laugh at 2 years from now compared to the other problems you're going to face after that. So if you can't tackle the environment of a little resistance where 5 friends are telling you, what, you're going to turn down this 24 lakh opportunity or 36 lakh opportunity, or sorry if I got the salary scale wrong here, opportunity, and you're going to start something on your own, and do you realize that for the next 5 years you may be the least paid person in your company? Well, if you can't answer that question and you haven't crossed that bridge and you don't have the conviction, chances are you won't be able to tackle some of the other crises and problems that's going to hit you every day. Yeah, go ahead.
Having a plan B. Now, if I go about something with all the passion that I have, there is no doubt, there is no confusion at all. And it does not work out for some reason. Now, I am standing at a point where I cannot go back and I do not know where to go from here. So, having a plan B initially in the first place at least will tell me where can I go on after the first thing does not work. So, wouldn't that be a more easy situation for me?
So put yourself, and you know, your guys are doing this all the time. You're doing simulated exercises and the what ifs for 2 years, right? So in your what ifs plan, draw out that what ifs. You're saying, I want to do X, Y, Z. And if I don't succeed in X, Y, Z, I want to do another idea or a business idea. No, I don't think that's a good idea. And if you reflect on that, you'll find that your possibility is how distracted are you going to be with that second idea? Second, 2 years later, whatever you thought for that second idea, how relevant is that idea going to be? And if not, are you going to keep revalidating that? And if 20% of your time is going to go to constantly revalidate the second plan, can you start seeing the suction of energy that's going out from what you want to do to succeed on what is anyway against odds to succeed? So I'm saying what I'm saying in a very and I know it's difficult to accept, but genuinely and absolutely speaking, my first question on no plan B was not what sector or whatever else. It's if you've decided to be an entrepreneur or you've decided to go for it, don't look at this as I'm going to try it for 2 years and see how it goes. Because that 2 years will pass, chances are you will stumble, chances are deep existential questions will be asked every day, am I doing the right thing? But in the 3rd year and the 4th year, it'll go forward. And you might go through a different career fork just because you didn't give it enough time, because you thought, well, I decided, my MBA taught me give it 2 years and give it a plan B. I'm sorry, I confused you more, I think. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, there's a mic there.
Good evening, sir. My name is Mohammad Abu Tahir. I am doing my MBA in Innovation and Intrapreneurship. Sir,
Innovation and?
Innovation and Intrapreneurship.
Okay.
So, sir, many people have ideas. Some like to keep it hidden and don't like to share it with others and would try to patent it. While on the other hand, there are people who like to share their ideas and keep it as open source so that more of our development can be made on that. So what's your take on that?
I think it's foolish for anyone today to assume that somebody's got an idea which at least 10 other people somewhere in the world are not thinking of it, mostly. The context of technically patenting an idea, if you can, go for it and do that. You don't need to be secretive about that thought process. Just figure out and what to patent that. But you know, patent actually means you've got to have come out with something so unique that it's patentable, because not everything is patentable. You can't just say X and then I want to patent X, because it's not patentable. It'll come back to you after 6 months with saying, I'm sorry, but you can't patent that. So don't use that as your benchmark. Secretive is unproductive. Collaborative is the way to go. That would be my recommendation to you.
Oh, thank you, sir.
Yeah. There's a gentleman here, and then I think there's some mics. There's another mic that can go that side. Go ahead.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
You talked about timing. How to find out whether it is the right time to implement a certain idea, or after a few years I should imply the same idea? Or, I mean...
You want to finish the sentence?
No.
Okay.
Finished.
I think that's a question I'll put back to you as a question, but I'll answer it. Don't worry about it. It's not a trick one. But when you're looking at that, just ask that question. What actual choices do you have? When you are supposed to figure out what it is, there is no golden answer that says, no, wait a minute. You're well before your time. Nobody, and no sage are you going to be able to do that. So first, you need to understand that to get whether your timing is right or wrong, depending on how much of a first it is, if it's that pioneering, you're going into that with a lot more fierceness to evaluate whether you're before your time or not. So be a lot more alert than if you were when you're not pioneering something. But only when you get in there will you be able to figure out whether you got your timing right or wrong. And my question was, A, be alert if that's what you think is a big consideration, and B, be very, very brutal about either scaling down your cost model if you want to stay in it, or getting out of it if you don't want to. And that's something that you'll have to just decipher, because you'll know whether you're a little before its time or not. But the chances are, the way it goes is be extremely alert. And if you think, wow, I went, because what is actually before its time? Chances are, unless the idea is really bad, it's only something that either has not discovered a market or a pricing, or your cost model with which you went in there was much higher than what you thought the demand would come for it. So you'll have to scale down your cost or look at it in a slightly different manner on your revenues. So therefore, what you'll have is a strong sense of alertness to tweak it, not necessarily to figure out, should I get out of it?
Means, once I get into the market,
You have to.
I start my entrepreneurship, then I will come to know whether it was right time or not. I can't pre-decide.
Nobody can for you. That's
you.
what's called entrepreneurship.
Thank you.
Mr. Screwvala, thank you first of all for coming. And my name is Akshay Lalan from the PGPEM program. I was inquisitive to know more about your venture fund and what kind of companies do you look to support in your fund?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can take that offline because it may not be beneficial for everyone, except that I would only like to state that for the 2 years I was transitioning from media, because I was running something full-time, I decided that I will invest in companies because for me, working with entrepreneurs was the best value add that I could give at that particular point in time. Right now, since I have completely moved out of media and entertainment and looking at that, I've already evolved that I'm much more a doer than an advisor or a mentor. And therefore, from now onwards, want to only build businesses upwards from that perspective. But in the time that I did, the sectors that I found interesting for me were twofold. Anywhere where it was very disruptive, where one could actually make a difference by looking at 2 or 3 things that we could do differently based on my past experience of scale, brand building, value creation, and being at a stage where that company can break out. So it's been in micro housing financing, it's been in agriculture, and to a little extent in sport. And where it wasn't that impactful, but where I think one could have made difference in brand and scale, which was in e-commerce. Yeah, go ahead. Whoever's got the mic. It's a little difficult for me to answer this question, and not because I don't have an answer, but because I don't want to necessarily influence a viewpoint here, because there isn't a right answer. At the end of the day, it's your own personal choice. So all I can say is I had a choice of doing my management or my chartered accountancy, and I chose not to do that. Do I have any deep regrets on that thought process? It's not relevant for me to examine that. And a lot of people have asked me, so do you have any regrets? In hindsight, what would you do differently? And I'm saying in hindsight, I haven't a clue, because of the simple reason that in hindsight, it's not relevant. Because for me, hindsight would mean at that particular point in time, if I had done what you're asking me, that what I would have done, what would be the other elements that would have been going on at that particular point in time? I could have finished my MBA and decided I'm structured enough to now only pursue a professional career and not be an entrepreneur. So I think it's difficult for any one person to give an idea other than what I started by saying in my introductory comments, which is figure out that this is something you've chosen to do as part of your education. So there's an asset of knowledge that you're going to gain. Some of it may be theoretical, some of it may be extremely practical. I think from little bit of what I've understood how the IIMs work here in this 21st century, there's a tremendous amount of peer pressure, but there's also a tremendous amount of competitiveness. So you're learning to be competitive. You're learning to think on your feet. You're being accountable for your timelines and deadlines. There is a sense of brutality and accountability. So these are all things that are definitely preparing you for the real world in whichever way you go. They can never be, figure out how you're going to be able to translate your learnings in that thought process. You're right that you need to also be a rounded person. But I don't think if you want to be an entrepreneur, then you want to do another 4 years of learning how to be a rounded person. Because at some stage, the best learning is on the job. But that's even in a professional career or in entrepreneurship. You will fail, just fail fast. And do not worry about that thought process. Because I'm saying that absolutely categorically, you will fail, and that should be used as a setback, fail fast, and move on. And that's it. There is no other easier way. And you can look at any ideology of anyone you look up to, or any model of people who've now succeeded, and go back on the time of at least 10 times in their career, they were almost going to be out of business or not there, but they are where they are now today. It's part of the cycle of life. It's part of the circle of life. So don't get that fixated about what do I need to do. See how you're going to translate this, and after that, get on with it. Now, if you're starting your own business and you're weak on certain things, hire right. If you can't hire right, find 2 co-founders. It's a nice way to go. But there's a problem with co-founders. It's a very, very important decision in your life when you're getting co-founders, because that's a relationship for 5 to 10 years, if not longer. So you've got to be, it's not an employment situation. You've got a co-founder, then you've got to understand idiosyncrasies. Now, it's fine to have lived in a dorm room and come up with something and you feel your best of friends. But even that crossroad does happen to a lot of people in life. So you've got to pick your co-founders. Each one needs to understand themselves better. And that's how you would marry your requirements of going forward.
Sir?
Yep. Sorry, buddy.
Sir, here.
Okay.
Here.
Sorry.
Sir, good evening.
That's the problem with Dolby sound, right? You never know what.
Okay, how are you?
Yeah, I'm.
Okay. Sir, here one says that the practical knowledge is big from the outside world than the theoretical knowledge is like in schools and other things. The practical knowledge is big from the outside as an entrepreneur. And in your life, there's sharing experience because you started life as a cable operator in Bombay, then you have to share any experience with that type of in starting your new firm. That time you have to how to learn from the outside world as an entrepreneur.
Firstly, I don't think there's a situation that there's only theoretical or practical knowledge. The point of the matter is, when a pilot is being taught how to fly a plane and he's in a simulator, he can crash, but he hasn't killed 300 people because he's in the simulator in that thought process. But the next time he starts flying that airplane, which is not in a simulator, he's carrying the risk of 300 passengers with him. And that's what life is about in every aspect. Some of us as entrepreneurs can fail. There are areas like a doctor or a pilot where you can't even fail, because that first failure could be your last failure in life. So if you look at some of the career options that people have, and everyone thinks here, but yeah, look at the challenges. It's like a surgeon. He cuts somebody up and says, oh, wait a minute. Wow, what's my plan B? There is no plan B on the surgery table, is there, in that context? And similarly, there are a lot of disciplines in life if you put yourself forward. So I don't think it's about theoretical and practical. But it is true that unless you work in a simulated environment sometimes, it definitely grounds you up in a much better way. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But the real world will throw you options and challenges which you couldn't possibly have done. And it's to prepare you for that. But otherwise, I think learning on the job is incredible. You can't replace that with learning in a simulated environment. There's no question about that thought process. But there's a time for everything. But I think the real world teaches you in a different sense in terms of practical knowledge. I think your knocks come harder. I think your level of confidence in yourself has to be supreme. Because if you're going out there and you're going to learn on your own, and you're the leader or you're the founder or you're the head of your company, everyone in crisis is going to look to you, how you move, how you smile, how you don't smile, how you're carrying your stress, everything. Because their future depends on how you look and how you feel and what you're thinking and how you're going to solve the problem. Or he's going to abort ship and move forward. So I think that's something that can only teach you when you're right there and no other way.
So
yeah, whoever's got the mic.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I have a good evening, sir. I have a question relating the entire media, the print and the electronic media industry.
Sure.
Since past 2 decades, you have this mix of brands and of advertising and more of commercialization of press that is happening. 2 decades back, that was not there. And someone who's at the helm of a particular media group is extremely powerful when compared to any other group. So the amount of commercialization of press that is taking place, don't you think that this mix of press being influential as well as extreme amount of commercialization taking place, you will reach a point where media will have to find a place that after this point, the commercialization shouldn't happen, because then the authenticity of the press or the media, news, will come down. So to what extent is commercialization of media viable for good press to survive in a country?
Yeah. So, look, I can answer the question, and I will, in one simple sentence at the end. But firstly, let me just put it this way, that firstly, you're looking at media from only news dissemination point of view, not the whole element of media. You're only talking about news specifically and dissemination of news. And I think your point is, if people are going to pay for news, then how credible is news?
Yes, yes.
Okay, well, how many of you all think actually you're reading credible news in that context? I think today the democratization of the medium through social networks and through everything that you're doing makes you form opinions primarily based on what other people are thinking and what the word of mouth is. So I think that that tombstone has already been put, and I wouldn't worry too much about the fact that if from 9 to 10 you've got anchors that are looking at putting a point of view, and you feel, now wait a minute, or somebody's putting an advertorial in that thought process, actually that's a tombstone for that media house to anyway look at it, that they don't have a future, because the thinking youth and the thinking people have already formed an opinion that says this is not credible for me. And today more than ever, technology has made it possible, where actually the medium is democratization. Hotels and airlines don't advertise because frankly, I'm looking for, did you go there? Did you go there? What did you think? You're looking at the word of mouth. Is anyone looking at the ads anymore? Is anyone looking at commercial ads from that perspective? No, they're looking for word of mouth, they're looking for referral, they're looking for all of those elements. So I think that change has already happened. I would not worry about it too much at all. I really wouldn't worry about it. And the very fact that you already picked it up means you're not taking that news seriously in any case.
Yes, sir.
And I don't think anybody else is in this room.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Good evening, sir. I'm Ishita. So I want to ask that how will you apply your innovations in investment sector in which you are stepping ahead?
How would I apply?
Your innovations in the investment sector.
So, but I'm not innovating when I'm investing. I'm looking. You mean how will I rank innovation in my investment sector? Again, I do want to further emphasize here again, and I did mention that earlier, that innovation is an ongoing element. There isn't. It's not a eureka moment. It's not a surprise me moment. If you look at innovation not as a discovery, which is what most people have thought it to be, but look at it as a constant chain, that's something you're going to find in that entrepreneur, the team, the leader, the CEO, the company, their track record. Have they constantly been edgy and on their feet? How do they react to crisis? Have they constantly been inventing and being ahead of the curve? What's the trend setting people do? Trend setting is innovation. Trend setting today is innovation. Innovation is not just a discovery process. And trend setting is an ongoing process. It's about reviewing yesterday and looking at tomorrow. So I think that's how you should look at that. And innovation should be looked at that in a very practical, consistent, and ongoing manner. That's my view. If that's not what is the general prevailing practice, that's just a point of view. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, so I'm running my social venture in Bangalore from last 2 years.
Can I just have the mic? Yeah.
So I just wanted to know that when is the right time, I would know, okay, this is the right time to expand my business to other cities. Maybe as I'm expanding.
So what social business is it?
It's like we provide doorstep service to people all over Bangalore to make non-monetary donations. So
Okay.
we have collaboration with NGOs.
And is it for profit or not profit?
For profit.
Good. So are you serious about your profit objectives, or you're looking at it already as a sort of a half charity
Yeah, we do
thing?
provide cost branding solutions to
No, my question to you is, are you already looking at this? Are you looking at this as a for-profit, or are you already sort of softening and saying this is for a good cause, so I won't make too much
For
money?
profit.
Yeah. So firstly, I think you should treat it as for-profit and go forward with that kind of conviction. If your specific question is when's the right time to go to the next city,
Yeah.
it's like saying what's the right time for looking at any geography outside. Have you exhausted that geography? Are you better off being the champion in that geography right now and owning it to the extent that you can, because there's already familiarity. Knocking on people's door, in your case, and getting funds, the first word that comes to my mind is building trust and credibility. Because when you build trust and credibility, more people will give it to you. Is somebody who gave it to you 3 months back giving it to you again? What is your ability to repeat, go back to that person? Are you staying in touch with them and actually communicating to them what happened to their funding? If you start suddenly looking at your entire enterprise with that thought process of building trust and credibility, and therefore first let me go at it in a constructive manner within that concentric area, you will find that you'll find your answer right there. Because let's not expand just for the sake of expanding. You can be a king in Bangalore, then absolutely be that. If you're getting your repeat customers from there, you can. Will you create a brand enough and the credibility enough for you to then, when you go to the other city, everyone says, oh yes, in Bangalore, yeah, you've been doing a phenomenal job. Yeah, come right in. If you're not doing that, maybe you're moving away too early to the next city.
Thank you.
Yeah. Who's got a mic? Otherwise, give it here. Yeah, he's already got the mic. Sure.
So I'm an undergraduate, and I would like to be an entrepreneur. So my doubt is like after finishing my BTech, should I go for an MBA and then start up my business, or can I directly start up my business? What's from your life?
I'm not a career counselor.
Yeah, I know that, but still.
And I don't want to play a career counselor in that. So let me ask you, what does your gut tell you?
Sure.
What does your gut tell you? What is it that you really want to do? I mean, if you had to decide on your own, which way do you want to go?
I feel like I'll start it, and once I be in it, and I'll study more about the business.
Yeah. So that's what you think instinctively, because you feel you've learned whatever you need to learn, and now you want to learn on the job.
No, it's like I believe like what is there in practical life is more important than what I learned from theory.
So then you've almost a little bit answered that question with full knowledge, of course, that it's difficult once you start your own business, then to say I'm going to take 2 years off and study. You can do that when you're in a professional career and you can take a 2-year sabbatical. Chances are, if you've been the founder of a company, it's going to be tricky for the first 10, maybe 20, maybe 30 years for you to take a sabbatical and then start saying, I want to take 2 years to study. So then that door is, as an entrepreneur, is not closed completely, but it's pretty much closed in that sense. But I think you have to go with what sensibility at that point in time is right for you. If you believe I'm ready to start learning on the job, I think you've answered that question. If you think I need 2 years more of studies, I would ask 2 more questions. One, why? Because somewhere down the line, in my opinion, it's not about the further studies. In my opinion, I would psychoanalyze that by saying, are you buying time? And if you're buying time, what are you buying time for? Are you buying time because you're not really confident that you can make it as an entrepreneur? Then start thinking that first, rather than buying time with another degree. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
What's the time? Sure. I'm fine if everyone's fine. Whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Good evening, sir. Yes.
Yeah.
Sir.
Go ahead.
My name is Saurabh. I'm from Calcutta. As we know that India is moving on a growth trajectory towards manufacturing sector. So as an investor, how you see the manufacturing sectors? Because when we talk about investing in this country, most of the investors wants to invest in service sector mainly, not in manufacturing sector. So what's your take on that as an investor?
Yeah, well, I'm not an investor, but I'll still give you the answer to that thought process. But see, I think 2-3 points there. One is, I think we're too much swayed by media reports today that gazillion amount of money is going into technology and e-commerce, because that's what is nice to hear about from the media. There is an incredible amount of money that's going into education, healthcare, waste management, and many, many, many other sectors. They're not headlined. That doesn't mean they're not going there. More money is going into education. The education sector here, even in the private sector, is 20x of all of e-commerce put together and all of technology put together. And I'm saying that even though you're sitting in the technology capital of India. So that's a myth that needs to go forward, and people are putting money as far as that is concerned. The question of whether 15% of our GDP today comes from manufacturing, and the Prime Minister and therefore the government overall has a mandate that says let's take that to 25%. If you're looking at 7 to 8% GDP growth, we need to come from 2-3 sectors. Agriculture, which was the mainstay of India's economy and GDP for such a long time, has come down. To move that up in a narrow period of time is going to be much more tricky. Therefore, it comes to our commitment to quality. I think overall as a nation, we don't have the aspiration right now for us to be able to get to that skill sets that can look at quality. Because we here genuinely believe that Jugaad, which is supposed to be frugal innovation, is actually shortcuts. So most people say the word Jugaad, but I know when they're saying it like Jugaad karte, like, which means I'm going to take shortcuts. I'm not in a bad manner, but it is, I would say, in a slightly negative manner. So I think the biggest challenge for us is skilled labor. And skilled labor is not about getting 5 million people and skilling them on lathe machines or skilling them about textiles and skilling them about design. We first need to build aspiration. You are all blessed and privileged here because you are extremely ambitious, reasonably clear of what you want to do, and have high levels of aspiration. Most of India does not, because they haven't gone through career counseling. They haven't gone through many other aspects. So I think that is something that I think where we're going to find a big challenge for us right now. So if I was looking at that sector, there's already enough money going in there. We don't need to worry about that. Yep.
Thanks a lot, sir, for that insightful talk. Given that you have mentioned that it's okay to be the outsider in the room, I hope this inspires all of us to take a step ahead in our pursuits. Now I would like to invite Mr. Vagul Rajan to please come on stage and hand over the memento to Ronnie sir as a token of gratitude. Ishita, can you please hand over?